Why we're attracted to a certain watch varies person to person, but there's usually a set list of criteria that someone's gonna look towards when they're maybe looking for their next piece. One of those that commonly comes up is going to be dial color. And of all the dial colors out there that seem to get the most fanfare, I would say blue dials has to be as strong as any. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is looking at some of the best blue dials in the watch industry. The goal of this video is not to list out every single blue dial because we would be here all day, all week, and probably all year. So instead, what we're gonna be looking at is a select few watches, and by a select few, I mean around 30 watches, so still a pretty comprehensive list. And how I'm trying to classify what gets on the list versus not is if the blue does something unique, it can tie into the overall design and elevates it to some degree. Maybe there's some finishing that is out of the ordinary, texturized surfaces, and how it all plays together to create a watch that is maybe more unique compared to other blue dials out there. It can't just be blue to be blue. That's not what I'm going for here. We have this broken down into a variety of different categories for styles of watch, and then there'll be a ascension in price for each one of those individual categories. So we'll bounce around between those categories until we get through around the 30 watches that we have on show here. Also, I wanna note there's gonna be no micro brands in this video because that will just open it up to further consideration. So what I'll do instead is link to two articles down below. One will be our microbrand article for 2023, have well over 50 different brands on there to check out. In addition, you can check out our blue dial article where we have a comprehensive list of different watches in the industry, variety of price points, which is an extension to what we're gonna be mentioning here. So if you want all different picks, a lot of them not going to even be in this list here, check it out in the description down below. So to kick us off here, we're gonna look at the everyday category and look at the Seiko 5 Sports with the SRPK 33. So this is the mid-size Seiko 5KX. So this is where it got shrunk down to 38 millimeters compared to the other conventional size at around 42 millimeters. I would say these were relatively true to size, but these are smaller watches. And the one standout through this entire collection, and I wouldn't say the one standout, but the one that was really out of the norm and was one of the flagship pieces that people talked about was the blue dial, or maybe I could say a teal blue. Some might even argue with me, is this green, is this blue green? I'm not going to get into the argument around that, but I would say that you could probably say this is blue. It's very unique. It's not quite this Tiffany blue, and I'll avoid bringing that up as a phrase throughout this video, I promise. But I would say it's the most eye-catching of the original lineup that we saw with this shrunk down size. And how it works with the markers, the handset to create a cohesive package that is striking is quite nice. And all coming together in a watch that is around $300. Now, next up, we have two different integrated steel sports watches. First is going to be coming from Japan, then we'll move to Switzerland. First with the Citizen Toyosa. So this was a watch that was released in 2022. A lot of fanfare, definitely had an interesting lane because of the just connection you would see to say something like an Oyster Perpetual, but then also having this integrated design and coming at a price that was well under $500. For this year, you saw them available in the United States for the first time. You had to go through JDM routes previously, and the standout here, at least for this video, is going to be that light blue. It has this understated and vibrant combination, and I would say the yellow with that more glossy tone would be probably the second most eye-catching. But this was a watch that I really like with this light blue. It has this mild sunburst effect, has a nice middle ground where it's going to be enough to get your attention, but not overstepping where it goes to a point where it starts to maybe put some people off. So next up here, we have the Tissot PRX. I'm going to be looking at the new Glacier Ice Blue Dial. This is now available at 40 millimeters and 35 millimeters. So you now have Powermatic versions of both of these dials, which is great to see. The standard blue is going to consistently be a watch that many people associate with this line and probably is going to be the bestseller long term. But this one had crazy peaks in excitement, and I think it looks phenomenal. Very similar to that Toyosa in terms of having this desaturated blue and how it combines with the steel case, the bracelet. It just complements those hits of polishing really well. And I would say with that waffle texture is probably my favorite dial of all the PRXs. It's really tough to say, but it is one that certainly is a standout. Next up, we have the Oris Big Crown Pointer Date Servo Volante. This was a watch that differentiated slightly from the Big Crown Pointer Date family, which is a vast collection that is hard to really break through the noise. This was a collaboration between a sustainable leather goods brand, Servo Volante, and Oris. Notably 38 millimeters, and also has this dark blue perimeter and then that gradient effect to a softer blue in the middle, but still contrasts to the stark numeral markings that are going to be on that dial. This is more of a contemporary form to what you will see from the Big Crown pointer date family, which does have this romantic undertone throughout: cathedral handset, coin edge bezel, Big Crown, and pointer date complication. I think this is a nice fusion of a contemporary point and a blue dial that is very nice. So next up, we have a watch that I would argue some are gonna say, why is this on this list? This is just a standard blue dial. Why would we be giving this watch any shine? I'll give my reasons why, but this is the Tudor Black Bay 36, or the non-diver Black Bays. This was a collection that was updated this year with the MT calibers, and one of the notable releases from this collection was the blue dial. The blue dial in this watch is not like the previous Tudor Black Bay 36. You had that more glossy blue from the previous version, more of a very solid, that didn't have as much changes and variations in different lighting conditions. It was still a very nice blue, but this one is more of a mysterious enigma in a way. You have this sunray effect, and then depending on the light, and I'll show a couple of pictures. One is from when we were in Watches and Wonders when these were initially unveiled, has this light blue. And then when you look in a more controlled environment in our studio, you see this darker blue. So if you're talking about direct versus indirect with light and how much you're shooting right at it, this dial changes a lot. Like in the shadows, very dark blue, almost an indigo, and then a light blue as you're starting to get indirect sunlight. And probably something that was overlooked, even by myself when I first saw these. They are a bit more mysterious and have more layers to them than you might realize. So next up, we have a new Nomos Ahoy model. This is going to be known as the Sky Date at 38 millimeters, which I think is a great size. This is a dial that I would say is in the running with their Siren Blue, which is more of a saturated blue. This is more the theme that we've seen so far. Lighter, powdery, and then has this fine-grained texture you only see from far away. And another aspect of this watch I love is how that date window seamlessly starts to transition from that dial backdrop. It doesn't even have this very stark cutoff that you'll see with some other date windows, and it can be jarring at times. This is just transitioning from that blue very naturally, effortlessly, and is a nice color that goes with the design of Nomos overall. It's never trying to do more than what is necessary, but still doing enough to grab attention and make it interesting all its own. If we're talking dials, we have to talk Grand Seiko. They will be on this list a couple of times, but this is one of my personal favorites. This is a Seiko Frost edition. This is the SBGH 295. I've posted this watch on Instagram a few times, and every single time that we post this watch on Instagram, it just kind of pops off. So this is a dial that I don't even know how to describe. You have these cross-diagonal line pattern that seems uniform in some ways, but then also in other ways, it almost seems like a random effect. And this is something that I like, this effortless idea that it almost seems that all these Grand Seiko dials are designed to look and emulate. It feels natural, it feels organic. And this is a dial, when you look up close, you just have to really punch in and see this watch in person, because in their basic product imagery, this thing falls very short into what it really is in actuality. I mean, just take a look at that dial. I mean, it is phenomenal. Then you have the raised faceted hour markers, the raised GS logo, and the hands that make this an absolute showstopper up close. So this is a bit of a different type of blue, and there's a different reason why I wanted to include it on this list, and this is the Omega Aquaterra World Timer. So obviously, blue dial, you'll see it at the outskirts, but at the center, you see a globe, and it's a titanium plate that is going to be laser ablated to create these small little micro cuts to emulate the globe. That central dial surface, sure, it does fuse in some green, but it creates this miniature map showing the rippling currents of the oceans, the raised peaks of the continents, and a true feast for the eyes up close. Like, this is another one. Again, you have to get into the dial close up. And this process and uniqueness to the tying in of the complication, I think this all creates an effect that allows us to be one of Omega's best dials, and a brand that is known for creating some good ones. When the new IWC Ingenieur was released this year, definitely a lot of mixed opinions, but one thing that I believe collectively was a shared idea is that they did a great job in bringing back the design of this watch. Put aside positioning and price for a moment, like, can we agree that this is a watch that looks rather great. Yes, there's a lot of integrated sports watches, but of any that needed to happen and really see an update, this was a family that certainly did. And my favorite dial of all of these, and this might be not as popular of a take, is the Aqua dial. It just has this light blue color, fusion of this kind of teal turquoise with darkened undertones, and the dial texture is phenomenal. It has these horizontal like 3-line patterns and then these different checkering effects to an alternating intersecting cubes that add this 3-dimension. I love this one. When I put this on the wrist, I was like, oh, you know, like maybe $14,000 or whatever it costs isn't so bad after all, because it wears beautifully on the wrist and that dial color is simply amazing. Next up, we have the Vacheron Constantin Overseas. This is the Gen 3 4500V version. This is on probably, if I have to narrow down my top 5 blue dial watches in the entire industry, this would probably be on there. Now I know some are going to say, like, Teddy, this is just straight up blue, but if you've ever seen this watch in person, you might be able to reason with where I'm going here and understand where I'm going with this, because I think this is, again, one of the best dials in the entire industry in the color blue. I don't know if this will make any sense, but you see these sunburst effect dials maybe have a light shimmer to them, and it almost just feels like it's all on the surface. With this watch, when you look at it, it almost feels endless. There's like a depth to it, and it is simply just beautiful to look at. With steel, it looks great, but also with gold, it looks crazy with its contrast. It's fusing these warm tones and these cool tones. It's just like a battle of the two forces coming together with a bracelet that is so well finished. It's one of my favorites. I've talked about this watch many times over and over again. And there's a lot of rumors about where the style is made. Is there potentially something that's going on and being in the same factory that FP Journe produces their dials? I don't know about this, but that's one of the rumors about it. But regardless, one of my favorites in the industry. So now we move to the diver category, and to kick us off, we're going to look at the Doxa 200, and the specific one I want to look at is the Aquamarine. This is a pretty crazy dial, and Doxa is known for crazy dials. It's part of the old just design appeal and why it was able to establish itself as a diving legend, with its original professional dial being that standout with that orange color. All of the dial colors are coming with a name to associate with it. This is known as the Aquamarine. It has this light blue, nearly pastel dial color that's bolstered up and has this crazy contrast with those darkened hour markers and the hands that are in black. The lume is underwhelming, but this color shines in other ways that make it really pop off the wrist. So recently I had this watch in my possession again, this next one, and it's a watch that definitely gets a lot of niche fanfare, but it reminded me why I was kind of drawn to it, and this is really comes down to the dial. This is the Squale 1521. So this case is, I would argue, one of the best diving cases out there. They produced cases for Blancpain, Doxa, as we previously mentioned, Heuer at the time as well. They're as legit as any when it comes to their diving pedigree. But the blue dial of the 1521 is, I think, the standout. You have this cobalt blue aquamarine dial. That was like the color. I was just looking into the different shades of blue, and this was the best way to describe it. Cobalt blue aquamarine. I know that's a mouthful, but I looked that up and that felt like the best fit. Has this pop of orange with the minute hand, has that legibility factor, but also this contrast. The bezel also on the COSC version with those recessed marking areas with the lume, it really elevates the feel. And this is a watch that I don't think people should sleep on. I don't think many people do sleep on it. It does get a lot of love. And there are some Squale watches that, quite frankly, don't do much for me, but this is one that definitely deserves a lot of flowers. Next piece here is going to be the Tissot Seastar 2000 Professional. So this is the professional dive watch for the Seastar family. And what I like about this piece and how I would classify it is, okay, let's take the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 on a budget, and then maybe something like the Seiko Save the Ocean dials, and just have a child at this like $1,000 price range. That's what this watch reminds me of. The lume is phenomenal. It comes with 600 meters of water resistance, helium escape valve. But the other reason why this watch I think is interesting is this dial. You have this stark blue at the center, gradient effect with the dark black at the outskirts, and then that wave dial pattern, which is something you've seen in other dive watches, of course, but they do it really well here and integrating it into a watch that is right around $1,000. Throwing in some more pieces that are newer and not all just pieces that have been around for a while. This is the new Oris Aquis Bracenet. I really like this dial. I was a fan of the Oris Aquis Upcycle. That was a watch that for some people thought it looked like vomit just because it was all over the place, very random, but I liked the concept. I liked the tie-in to where the plastic dials were being produced and how they were all very unique. This is going around that same theme with the sustainable cause, which sometimes I feel is overdone by many brands, but this is done in a way where I can get behind it because it creates a cool end result in the process. You have this texturized pattern. Some will argue that this maybe is just as much green as it is blue, but there's some blue in there. Come on, give me some credit here. And then you have this textured pattern. I think it's more easy to pull off in the upcycle. You have this unique dial format that feels like a one of one in many ways when you get to put it on. And very similar to some other watches that we've mentioned, there's a lot to get lost in. The Aquis family is one of those watches, certainly, but this is one that in recent memory is one that stands out. So the next Tudor here, and some people might argue again, isn't this just freaking blue? Why is this on this list? This is the Tudor Pelagos, the 42mm option. And the reason I wanted to include this watch is how you can look at blue beyond just the dial itself and how it's able to come together as a holistic package. And that's also gonna be mentioned again later as we go into this video with some other watches. But with the titanium, the muted color, you have more of a pale look there. And then you have a saturated blue. And I wanna mention that the blue on this version is different than the fixed and some other blues that Tudor is going to utilize. I find this is the most saturated, but also is going to be matte in its approach. And with the titanium, it just ties together beautifully. I think it's seamless. It looks great. The contrast is unbelievable. If I was going to dive with a watch, this would be something I would be thinking about because it is so easy to read this watch and the legibility is off the charts. And I love how they're able to combine that very sharp blue, which I hope they would utilize even more in the future on different lines from the brand, with that titanium. It's a great combination. The next watch has to be on here, in my opinion, when you're talking about blue dials. It's one that commonly is mentioned. This is the Omega Seamaster Diver 300, the wave dial. Come on, this is something that so many people will talk about. It has this popularity that really since the bond connection was established, I think it's allowed so many people to just have this connection to this piece. It's a watch that brings forth nostalgia. It's a watch that brings forth just a lot of excitement and aspiration, because I think for so many people, this was like their first luxury watch and a great one to choose from. It has this reflective mirroring surface with its blue backdrop, with the wave pattern. It's easily one of the best dials in its price point, and I love how it has, within the different lighting conditions, that reflective tone, but also has some mild sunburst, can look matte in certain lighting conditions. It's a watch with a lot of depth in a variety of areas, where you're talking about the movement, you're talking about its specification, its history, and popularity and mass market appeal, but also the dial itself. It all delivers, and the dial is one of these characteristics that I think so many people just gravitate towards and love when they think about the Seamaster Diver 300. For the next watch, I'm gonna include one other Omega here because that whole 75th anniversary collection, those summer blue dials, I mean, one of those has to be on this list, right? And I think you could mention the Planet Ocean. That watch is phenomenal at 39.5mm. But the one I wanted to mention, because it's so out there and different with its dial, is the Omega Seamaster Ultra Deep 6,000 meter. This piece was recently brought into the collection in the past year. When you're looking at the Ultra Deep, it took the prototype model that went down to the Marianas Trench and made it available to mass market appeal. It is still a very big watch, but surprisingly much more wearable than you might expect. The area where it's going to stand out and maybe being too large for some people is actually more in the thickness than it is the top to bottom of the case. I would try this on if you're actually on the fence about it. If you have a larger wrist or maybe even a medium-sized wrist, you might be able to pull this one off. But where this dial excels is you have the dark blue dial, you have the lighter blue inlays on that bezel and throughout the watch, but it resembles the bottom of the Challenger Deep with its dial texture, the deepest part of the Marianas Trench where the concept watch was able to withstand. You have that coated liquid enamel that is done in a way that's creating that specific pattern and texture. But the hidden trick here is when you take a UV light and you see the hidden message, Omega was here with the depth rating. This is such a cool little Easter egg, which is not really an Easter egg. I think everybody that knows this watch knows this hidden message. But when you see this for the first time, it's a real treat to look at. And Omega has these crazy splashes of creativity here and there with, say, something like the Snoopy with its case back. This reminds me of that. It's a lighthearted theme, not taking yourself too seriously, but still is a really damn cool feature of a watch. It doesn't do anything, but is an interesting party trick and something that, makes us love these things even more. I wanted to mention one Rolex, and the Rolex to me that stands out the most in this regard is going to be the Smurf. The Smurf, very similar to that Pelagos, has this blue that is striking. And then when you combine it with the case material with the white gold, there's nothing really else like it. With that bright blue ceramic bezel, it has this slightly reflective nature to it with the matte effect of the dial. Gold case. I've just always been a fan of the Smurf. I mean, I would prefer a Smurf over a Hulk. I know that's a hot take. White gold is a bit more of a aspirational material, let's say, but I love the way that this watch looks on the wrist. Now we move into the refined or the dress-oriented category. And to kick us off, we're gonna look at Seiko again with the SRPF 5.3. I've mentioned this watch many times in this channel, and I'm gonna keep mentioning it because I do think it is an amazing dress watch. Yes, it is large at 41.7 millimeters. That's probably the #1 rub. It is 47.3 millimeters on that lug to lug. But the dial finishing for the price here, in terms of how it has all this visual depth to it, the texture is phenomenal. You have blasted effect creating this pebbling sand-like texture. And then I love how this extends to those hour markers to create this cohesive and uniform look from the backdrop of the dial to those indices. Next up, we have Anordain, and what they're known for is enamel dials. And here we have the Model 1 Parisian Blue. So they're based in Scotland, and you've probably seen me mention these guys before. I would say for their price range, around $2,000 for some of these pieces, you're getting, I would argue, the best enamel work you're gonna find for this price tier. There's some great other brands that are utilizing enamel and doing this process, but it's very hard to come by in the sub $5,000 range. This is done with this process of heating this glass powder and involves this wafer thin metal disc and having these multiple layers be cooked on top layer by layer and fired in an oven upwards of 800 degrees Celsius. The failure rate for these dials is very high. You have these different gradient patterns you can find with their watches across their entire collection, but also have more of these matte colors that you can go for too. I know it takes a while to get some of their watches, and they're out of stock many times, but it just feels appropriate to mention them on a list like this. Next, we have the Baume & Mercier Clifton Baumatic. This is a watch that I feel does not get enough praise for a variety of reasons. One is going to be the 5-day power reserve, the movement, class leading for its segment, but also this dial and how this watch wears is one that I don't believe is something that's addressed enough. It's a great watch for around $3,000. And this dial, how it has this darkened blue effect, you have darker outskirts, has this glossy look at the center and then throughout, and then the white crosshair markings and other white text on the dial. I just love how this watch looks, and it's probably something that I feel is overlooked. Dress watches in general have been something that have fallen out of favor compared to what we've seen in the rest of the industry, but I'm all for the dress watch resurgence, and I think that we will see it in the near future. And this is one that in its segment is among the best. So I could probably do an entire micro list within this video for just Grand Seiko dials because they do have a lot for blue. I'm gonna mention one here that's more towards the attainable end of their spectrum, and this is the SBGW 283. So taking that classic manual wound 9S64 movement on the inside, you've seen this with other SBGW models, most commonly associated with the SBGW 231 with that cream dial, curved dial. Beautiful watch, pure as can be, looking back to the earliest 1960s, no date. But this dial is very similar to that Seiko model, just beautiful. You have this light blue cross, just texturized surface. And when you have a dial this pure, and then this texture, it almost makes it that much more noticeable. I think sometimes when you look at a dial, you just look at the color alone. And in this case, you have a watch that is so reverent to the past that it allows the dial to be elevated even further. For the next piece, we have the JLC Master Ultra Thin Moon, and this is a watch that I long championed just because I thought it was one of the best points of value. Prices have gone up quite a bit. I still think they're a phenomenal watch for those that are interested. It could be worn as a daily, which I love because so many people out there might be looking for the best watch they possibly can for around, say, $10,000, $11,000. This is certainly in the running if you are not committed to just going for a style of watch and just want a killer watch for the money, regardless of the style. It's beautiful to look at. And then the blue dial, this is the one for me that actually surprised me the most when I held it in hand. You saw the silver dial, which timeless, very easy, never going to clash with anything. But then you have this blue sunray version. It has this finish that has these streaking reflections from the dial center, and then it seamlessly transitions to that mysterious darkened night sky of that moon phase complication. And then it has these dark silver reflected surfaces throughout. I adore this watch in blue. Next, we have A. Longa & Zona with the Saxonia Thin. This is the Aventurine dial. So this watch measures in at around 6 millimeters thick. It's thin, it is classic German design, straightforward, nothing more than what is required, but this is an Aventurine dial that is just world class. And although it is hard to say, it feels like a bargain in comparison to other watches out there. I mean, this watch around $20,000 or so is just beautiful to look at. The luster of those flakes, the blue dial and the vivid backdrop, it's extraordinary. And it evokes these feelings of like looking through like a telescope and looking at the extended galaxy and all those different stars. They have this shimmer to the dial that I just love. This next piece is perhaps my favorite blue dial in the entire industry. This is the FP Journe Chronomet Blue. There's just something about this dial. It is one that, yes, of course we know about the watchmaking, we know about FP Journe, but there are these different just layers of this dial that just create these different feels depending on how you're looking at it. You have a blue reflected surface that changes in some light, reflective in some areas, dark blue under other lights. And then one of my favorite features of this watch, and not enough people mention it, but you see it in person for the first time and you're looking at it almost as if you're looking off onto a pond, and you see this reflective surface as if you can look underneath the dial. You'll see the numerals mirror each other and they'll float underneath with a mirroring type reflection. It's just a stunning, stunning blue, and one of my favorites in the entire industry, if not my favorite. And finally, we shift to complications. The first complication here is going to be with Longines with the Avigation Big Eye. This is the titanium version, which comes with that dial in petroleum blue is what they call it. You have faux lume markings, which I know some are not going to be a fan of. The original Big Eye was brought back after looking back into their archive in 2017, that traditional black dial with those printed white markings. This is going to be more of a sporty new age version and also wears much better on the wrist with that titanium case. That blue dial is so vibrant to look at, and then you have the handsets, the faux lume markings, which with that dial, I actually kind of like the combination. It could clash for some, but I enjoy it. And it blends inspiration from a 90-year-old watch design with a type of presentation that feels contemporary. Next, we move along to the JLC Polaris chronograph. This is a model that was recently updated, and it's a showstopper when it comes to its dial texture and different layers to it. Quite frankly, it actually goes through a meticulous process with 35 layers of hand-applied lacquer to create a textured pattern at the outskirts with a lined central circle formed dial center. And I love how there's a strong break between those two different areas for the dial itself. Visually for myself, I just enjoy it the most in blue, and it is no question one of JLC's best when it comes to this idea. And finally, we have the H. Moser & C Endeavor Perpetual Calendar. So this is a watch that I have reviewed on the channel. Believe it or not, despite it looking so minimal, this is a perpetual calendar, but then you have this insane enamel dial. Tantalum case, and this is the antithesis of what I would consider for things like a Patek Philippe, all these romantic like ideas infused within the dial design. This is a crazy looking watch, but it's so simple in its execution and it deserves a lot of kudos. So the dial though, let's talk about this because it is absolutely crazy. You have a solid gold dial base that is first ingrained with a fine, almost hammered texture before being covered with multiple layers of 4 different shades of enamel that are thinner in the center and then thicker as it gets to the outskirts of the dial. The enamel then alternates between 12 rounds of firing and then adding additional layers of pigment to achieve this oceanic fume effect the brand calls abyss blue, which I have to say is rather accurate. But all right, guys, that is my video here today looking at some of the best blue dials in the industry. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. I don't just say that, that does help out the channel tremendously. Also check out TeddyBaldassarre.com. TeddyBaldassarre.com is a full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also how we're able to fund all these productions, do our collector series, travel across the world and do different interviews with brand CEOs and factory visits, and what makes all that possible is through selling watches. So if you want to support that, see more content like it, how we're able to make it possible is through selling watches. So if you are in the market, we'd love to have your business. It allows us to keep doing what we're doing, and we love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.